Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Welcome to the Green Building Matters podcast. We're going to have a lot of fun today because I'm going to interview Trace Blackmore. Trace, thanks for joining us this morning.
Absolutely, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
Trace and I go way back. We're actually in, the green building movement, but here in Atlanta. Trace actually runs a water treatment company and services big commercial buildings, campuses, facilities, all in and around Atlanta. And so, Trace, though, let's talk a little bit about your career and how did you get into water treatment, and to the person listening that just doesn't know what water treatment is, can you explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. I don't know if there's any one person that sets out to be a water treater. I think it's something that just happens, or you're born into the industry. And mine was the latter.
Okay.
My father was a water treater. And ever since I could remember, he sort of brought me around when he was servicing his accounts. In fact, one of my first water treatment memories was I was in an account with him. I believe it was a hospital. I was 5 years old, and I burnt myself on his hot plate.
Oh, wow.
So I don't recommend listeners take their kids while they're servicing boilers and things like that. But that was definitely my first memory.
Okay.
So my father got me into the industry. And your second question was explain a little bit to what water treatment is.
Sure.
Water treatment, in my opinion, is one of the most misunderstood things in everything in the building world, I think. I think people in my space do a very poor job of explaining what water treatment is. And I don't know what the reason for that is, whether it's if you know more, you're going to hold me more accountable, or I don't know any more myself, so I don't want you to think I'm dumb. I don't know what the answer is, but I've tried to make a career of educating my customers to know enough to hold me accountable, because then they see the value of true water treatment. So I like to explain it very simplistically. I like to use the metaphor of a four-legged stool, and water treatment is sitting right on top of that four-legged stool. And then there's four separate legs that represent the four areas that you have to do completely in order to have a sound water treatment program. So that's control of corrosion, that's control of scaling, control of microbial fouling, and then the last leg is control of general debris. If you do those four areas well, and only then, you can have a sound water treatment program.
You know, a lot of those listening, Trace, they are on the kind of architecture side, designing and specifying maybe the new pieces of equipment. Some are running existing buildings. And so that's a good segue to talk a little bit about, it's not just about making your equipment last longer with water treatment, right? But you want the water flowing. You want to be more water efficient with your bleed off and blow down. But how about energy? And that's a good point to talk about sustainability in a minute. But we often forget that a lot of what you do and your company, Blackmore Enterprises, does is there's a lot of energy savings if you're doing better with your water treatment, right? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I don't think people understand how much water is actually used with their heating and cooling equipment, and especially how much energy is used with that. People focus their attention on how much they're paying for a water treatment service, but not necessarily how much they're spending on running all the equipment that takes that water treatment service. In fact, and I can't remember, it was through BOMA, and I can't remember, I think it was like 2011, they put out an article that said 50% of all the electricity coming from that building is coming from that chiller plant. So and then on that same chart, they said 2% of all the money spent was going to water treatment. So the interesting thing about that is that 2% has a direct impact on the other 98%. So if your water treatment program is supporting those four legs, you're going to get water savings, you're going to get energy savings.
And for all those listening, if you happen to be on a LEED project, remember LEED version 4 now rewards you up to 3 points if you're really doing a better job with your cooling towers, with your water treatment, hitting a certain amount of cycles. So my challenge to you is just ask better questions of your HVAC installers and those that are servicing your buildings, because it's not just about the water treatment, it's the energy we can save too.
Absolutely.
So Trace, talk a little bit about sustainability. Obviously, I've made a career out of the green building movement, educating and consulting. I know you personally have had a Prius that you put extra batteries into to extend the range. So how did you really kind of start getting into sustainability?
I think as a person that lives on this planet, you have to respect that we have a finite amount of resources. And there's this battle going on that some people, they don't believe that or whatever. So whether you're a good steward of the planet or you just want to be more frugal and have to buy less energy and water, whatever camp you're in, there's a reason to do better with energy and with water. And I think that pairs so well with water treatment, because water treatment, I think, was the original green movement before there was ever a green movement. Water by far is the best heat transfer medium out there, and there's only so much water readily available to us. So somebody like myself as a water treater, we've got such an impact. There's so much that we can do to protect this valuable resource and make sure that we're using it the way we should.
No, that's you nailed it. So you got into it early, and now you are currently a lead AP O+M. So I know you took that exam, you passed it. There's only a little over 3,000 people in the world that have passed the O+M exam. You've specialized in greening of existing facilities and buildings. So why take that second level, that tier 2 credential? What has it done for you? And is there, sparked some conversations, I hope?
It definitely has helped me. If it's done one thing, it's helped me stand myself out from other people. And it allows me to speak a common language with the building owner, with the building manager. And they kind of give me the benefit of the doubt as soon as they see those credentials on my card. I did get my lead GA, and I'd like to talk about why I decided to do that. But then once I did, I decided that, this is a great program. And I didn't really feel that there were people in the water treatment industry that were promoting it as good as they could. So I decided to go and get that other credential so I could do more work with that effort.
No, it makes sense. I know you've been an advocate, and luckily working on some lead projects get you some continuing education, and then you produce a lot of education in your industry too. So let's talk about career. Early in your career, Trace, did you have a mentor or two that you could name, and how did they influence you?
Absolutely. Without a doubt, it was my father.
Sure.
My father introduced me into the water treatment industry, and he's no longer with us. And if I knew that he was not going to be part of my life at whatever particular time, I would have taken better advantage when I had him, and I would have asked him more questions, and I would have taken better notes. But without a doubt, it was my father. I'm also a member of a group called the Association of Water Technologies, and that's a group of other water treaters, other water technologists. And through that group, I've been able to meet people that are like my father and that are very giving of information and mistakes and successes that they've had throughout their lives. And there's several within that organization that have really taken me under their wing and allow me to ask them questions when I don't know the answer.
And to all those listening, you've heard it on podcast after podcast here, is mentors. Some are formal and some are maybe informal, but just someone that has influence and you really want to learn from them and make sure you let them know where they helped you get. So talking about trade organizations and AWT, you're very active there with the trade organizations, Trace. I just want to point out to those listening that I commend AWT for really working with the U.S. Green Building Council to modify for LEED version 4 the water efficiency credit that deals with water treatment. It's a good example of if you speak up, no matter what part of a building, new or existing building you work on, you have influence over. Next thing you know is you can maybe help modify the future iterations of lead. And I think AWT did a good job with that. Now it's worth not just 1 point, essentially, but now up to 3 points. It's a big deal. So now we're going to take the water treatment side of our lead projects even more seriously.
Absolutely.
Hey, Trace, what's keeping you busy right now? Do you have any projects you're working on?
Actually, I have a few. One that I'm very proud of, and you just mentioned this with the Association of Water Technologies. I'm their representative on the Water Efficiency Technical Action Group. And I just started that this year. So still getting my feet wet with that, but I think it's great that our two organizations are working together, and they're looking for people like myself to educate them on what they can do better to make things more efficient.
Yeah, and another opportunity for anyone listening to volunteer is see when your discipline is coming up for that next iteration, that change within LEAD or WELL or any of these programs is if you don't speak up, then they're not going to know how better to serve your clients. How do we make these rating systems maybe be not an easier fit, but a better fit? So there's not just LEAD credits that we just never do. Here's what really the industry experiences when you ask us to do that LEAD credit. All right, Trace, let's talk a little bit more about water treatment. We talk sustainability and energy, but just where I'm going with this is what's something we might not know about water treatment, but even if we're in an office building right now listening to this podcast, how does water treatment actually affect me if I'm inside of a building? Sure.
It's the thing that is inside the walls. It's running through the HVAC equipment. Nobody ever thinks about until there's an issue. It is, as we said earlier, the number one thing that can affect everything else as far as efficiency. The chiller uses by far the most electricity in that building, and water treatment is the item that makes sure that chiller is running as efficient as possible. Something as small as the thickness of a sheet of paper, when we talk about inefficiency or scale or something that's not allowing that heat transfer to efficiently transfer from one surface to another, that thickness of a sheet of paper can translate to 10% more energy used. So if we're talking about the highest energy user in a building, and now we're adding 10% onto that because it's dirty, that's a huge number. And so anyone listening that maybe you have a different water treater or you're specifying some equipment, again, I just want to make sure you're armed with better questions. So go have some of these conversations. What kind of cycles are we hitting? Look up the LEAD V4, go to usgbc.org/credits and look up the requirements. Can we get there? Is it harder to do in our region? Maybe water is different in different parts of the United States, but anything else to add there? Charlie, I would say going back to our original statement at the top of the program, ask about those four legs. How are they doing corrosion control? And how are they proving it to you? One of the things that is available are corrosion coupons. We can measure the rate of corrosion. So that should be your water treater's report card. You or your vendor should be looking at your chiller logs. They should be looking at the user interface, and they should be looking to see how much energy is being used now versus this time last year when it was the same temperature outside. And if it's not getting better or at least staying the same, that's an indicator that the machine is not clean and something's not going on. But with everything that we do in water treatment, there is a metric that the vendor should be able to try back so the consumer can understand, not only am I writing a check every single month, but I understand why I'm writing this check and I know what I'm getting for it. Trust but verify, ask better questions. Trace, you have an awesome career here, an entrepreneur, you have a successful water treatment company. You teach, which I know is a passion of yours. But what would you say is your specialty? What's your gift? What are you best at? This was a difficult question for me to think about. I don't like to brag about myself, and I feel like that's kind of where this is going, but maybe not. That being said, I really feel that I have the ability to take a complex issue and break it down into simple bite-sized pieces so not only myself can understand it, but a team can understand it. That would be a gift. I think a lot of people can get overwhelmed by information, by a long course, a full day course, many, many modules. So where do you start down that kind of breaking down a complex item? Where do you typically go first? Just curious. Well, if it's a water treatment issue, I will step back and I will not take anything for granted. I'll get all the information that I can. And I'll use that, but I won't take it that is the end all be all. And then I've got to see it in order for me to believe it. And I actually get a flashlight out and I track down piping, and I want to see where everything's going, to see if things are plumbed right, to see if things are being injected right into the system. And then when we figure out what the actual issue is, now we have a cause for it, then we rally the team together to figure out how we're going to fix it.
That's awesome. I know you're highly productive. You have a lot on your plate as a busy professional. What are some routines or rituals that have helped you be more successful?
Charlie, one of my favorite books out there is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I read that, I think, when I was 19, and it really did shape how I did things in my life. And one of the things it taught me was how to keep a schedule. And our life is about the commitments we make, and people judge us on whether we keep those commitments or not. So what I like to do is every single day, I look at my day, I plan my day. But that's based on earlier, every Sunday at 7 p.m., I plan my week. And I do that by looking at the previous week and see what life's taught me. Was I trying to do too much? Was I not doing enough and I had too much idle time? And then I use the next week to try to fix that. And then every single day I come in and I look and I say, okay, where are my committed points in time? Those are my appointments. And then in between those appointment times, that's when I do my to-do list. And here's where the magic in the book was. They taught me how to do a prioritized to-do list. And essentially what you're doing, you're looking at the 12 things you've got to get done today. And what most of us do is we start at the top of the to-do list, we work our way down, and if we don't get all the way down to number 12, we feel like we haven't done a good job. Well, the prioritized to-do list is we look at everything we have to do, and things that must be done today or they'll lose value, it gets an A. And we put an A right beside that. Things that should be done today, but they're still important, they're not necessarily going to lose value today, they're going to get a B. And then optional tasks are going to get a C. And then I go back through my A's and B's and I rank those in the most important, just 1, 2, 3. So if I only get one thing done today, it's going to be A1 and I feel like I've had a productive day.
You know, the 7 habits, Trace, I know you've taught on that subject within some groups we're in. I've had you come to my companies and even train and teach 7 habits. To those listening, I'll admit I was naive 15, 20 years ago when I first saw the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I was like, I don't know. But now it's more real than ever. And so over the last 3 years, I've really enjoyed it, the principles within the 7 habits. And so if you haven't yet, listen to it on Audible or get the book and find some videos on YouTube as Stephen Covey goes through some of the main concepts. It's really powerful stuff and it's timeless. So thanks for sharing that visualization, Trace. Speaking of books, 2 questions here. One, is there a recent book you've read or listened to you'd recommend? And then the follow-up would be, is there another book that maybe would make a good gift?
Sure. The first book that comes to mind is one that you and I just read in our group, The Advantage, by Pat Lencioni. And I really appreciated this book. For those in your audience, and I know you've read some Pat Lencioni books, people love Pat Lencioni because he creates a story around characters and he builds up those characters and people are actually involved in the story and learning some business items. I don't like that. I just want to know the business items. So The Advantage was just a synopsis on I think it was the last 7 books that he did. And then it told me the meat of what I needed to do and what I could put in action.
Yeah, for those that haven't, Pat Lencioni, most of his books are business fables, those stories with some great underlying concepts. But The Advantage, it's really has some great business advice in there too, and personal. That's the thing with most of these books. Sure, it might seem like it's more the business and your career, but a lot of it can apply personally.
Absolutely.
Too. What's another book maybe to make a good gift?
It would be the book that you gave me for Christmas as a gift.
Nice.
And of course, that was The Tribe of Mentors by Tim Ferriss. I'm a great fan of his podcast. And he just does a tremendous job. And I will say that I have used his book on occasion to, when I'm getting ready to go into a meeting and I want to get people talking about something, I haven't read it cover to cover, but I'll go and I'll look for something that's relevant.
Yeah.
I'll then talk about that, get the conversation started, and then have my team finish in around those details. And I've also had some podcast topics based on those books.
You never know where you're going to get some inspiration, but I do like some of Tim Ferriss's work because it's very short chapters. You can really flip anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a particular order, and get a life best practice. Not just a business best practice. Actually, a follow up there. I know you're also a fan of the EOS program and the book Traction, and you run really good meetings within your company. Trace, any quick advice on how to run a meeting really well?
Well, Gino Wickman wrote a book called Traction, and we were looking for a better way to run our company. This is more than you asked for, but we've got an open mic, so I'm going to take advantage of it.
I went off script here.
So we knew that we were exceptional water treaters. But as far as running a business and all the things that come into running a good, solid business, we were guessing at a lot of things, and we were getting some things right and some things we didn't know we could do better. And that book allowed us basically an operating system that we could do what we were doing on this operating system and get so much more impact. One of those items was how we run meetings. And the key to running a successful meeting is everybody knows the agenda before they get there. And if people are just learning what the meeting's about when they're sitting down, that's not going to be a productive meeting. But if people are thinking earlier in the week, how am I going to make this a productive meeting? What's my role in this? How am I going to bring something up? That is going to be a productive meeting. So the agenda, starting on time and ending on time, making sure that we know everybody's time is valuable and we're not going to take any more of it than we can. And then staying on that agenda. And then the last thing that he does that I think is great is everybody at the very end rates the meeting. We all agree on what a perfect meeting looks like. How did we do in today's meeting in reference to that perfect meeting? And then we all go around the table and we rate it from 1 to 10.
Yeah, because then everybody is more accountable to strive to make it an awesome meeting at 10. Thanks. I know you have been practicing running really good meetings in your company for years, and so I wanted to make sure we shared that. Let's start wrapping it up here. So talking career again, Trace, is there any advice you wish you had received a little earlier in your career? And then any words to someone listening that's maybe pivoting into the green building movement and making a career go of it there?
I would say always ask why. I think of the wonderful people that I've had in front of me at one time or another that took their time to teach me something. And I was more worried about coming off smart or not letting them have an opinion on me because I didn't know something when I should have been asking why to get all the information I could out of them so I could understand exactly what it is that they were talking about. But more importantly, I could do it on my own when that came back around.
No, that's great advice. It's not like you're being a smart aleck. You want to understand the full context so you can do an even better job. Go ahead.
And I would also say that with that, whenever I learn something new, I try to pivot my role from student to teacher as quickly as I can. Because if you're teaching me something, Charlie, nobody out there is really expecting me to know the information except for myself. If you are teaching me something and now my team is expecting me to take that information from you and then through me teach them, I look at that at a totally different way. And I'm anticipating their questions and I by default am learning more.
That's awesome. Now, great advice. Trace, you have a podcast that you've been working on for a while. Where can people find out more about the Scaling Up podcast where you're really serving not just your industry, but you have some pretty fascinating guests?
I tell you, I had some really cool guests. You've been a guest on my show.
Thanks.
And that was a really fun show to do. So my podcast is called Scaling Up. ScalingUpH2O.com is where you can find that. We're on iTunes and Stitcher, and I believe every major podcast platform. But I wanted to do something that allowed somebody in my industry to become better. I think there's so many people out there, I don't want to use the word mediocre, but that's the only one that comes to mind, that could be great, but they need that little push to get them to be there. So I want to be that little push, and I want to take all the information that I've amassed through my career, and it's not easy to find. I want to make it easy to find and push them to be better. I say on pretty much every show that a rising tide raises all boats, and I want to be that tide that helps get the water treatment industry better.
Yeah, there's a good quote. It actually is on a good T-shirt. I'll credit it to a software company. It's teach everything you know. Trace, thanks for being on the Green Building Matters podcast. Just congrats on all of your success, your Elite APO plus M. Don't forget your continuing ed. And everybody go check out Trace's podcast, Scaling Up. Thanks, Trace.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode, and you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.